And what we want to do today is think about spiritual generosity. And the last two lines of that poem, keeping in mind, fleeting temples we make together when we say, here, have my seat. Go ahead, you first. I like your hat. What if those are the true moments of sacredness? And as you know, I've been saying that for all fall. I've been saying we are creating the sacred together. I say that because that is part of the humanist belief system. Humanity creates the holy, the sacred, including all the holy books, sure, but the feeling of sacredness that we have within ourselves. So I want today to go to a slide and talk a minute about John Dewey. As you know, we come out of the John Dewey tradition of pragmatism. We're doing a constructivist way of doing our whole life education. And John Dewey said this: God equals the active relation between the ideal and the actual.
Teach.
Okay? So here's your Venn diagram. You got the actual, you got the ideal, and you got God. Now, the interesting thing about this is that this is neutral, isn't it? As I've too often said, everybody's God agrees with them politically. It's often unfortunate because my God wants, women controlled in bedroom and all. Yeah, my God says women. Yeah. Well, that's God. That's what we're arguing about, is the ideals. But let's go to the next slide. And we say human action, actually, then, for Dewey, is God, right? Human creativity, human action between the actual and the ideal is where we are. And what Dewey will say is, yeah, you can go right, you can go wrong here, but since we believe in democracy, we're going to talk it out a little bit. We're going to consider what this human action can do in the actual and the ideal. And we liberals are going to say, what do we need to do? We need to increase human flourishing. We need to build generosity into our climate, into the way that we act. And so John Dewey is often, he's a pivotal figure from the 1930s in that he said, okay, liberals, you can use the term God, go ahead. And then later he said, well, I think I made a mistake about that, because now all the liberals, I believe in God, but it's not the same God as the conservatives believe in. So where are you going with that? It becomes the question in terms of the spiritual generosity that we're talking about. Do we want to conserve, or do we want to progress out there in the way? Now, I say this because, you know what? This is actually quoted in a sermon that we're going to be looking at today at noon. Wendy Jerome, where are you? She's here somewhere, and she's going to be talking about a Carl Storm who was a senior minister here, and he actually quotes this particular bit from John Dewey as God being this active relation, and then he says, why do we bother? Why do we use this term if this is what we're talking about? Yes, please. And also, we have Jay here today. One of the things that we've been talking about is how do we begin talking about the many kinds of humanism? That's why also we'll have Anthony speaking a little bit later with an Afro-Caribbean way of looking at humanism, right? But yes, please, Jay, take it away.
I agree with you. I'm heard, right? Okay, there we go.
Yep.
I agree with you, and I think it's interesting as you come from John Dewey. I immediately go to James Baldwin around his quote around if God had any validity at all, right? If the concept of God, and he does make that very clear, the concept of God has any validity at all, right? It should make us more loving, right? More freeing, right? So when we speak to this ability that Dewey is pointing out around human action as a concept, maybe, in a lot of our humanist spaces, I would agree that, God is not in the equation for most. As an individual, who even has explored work with Dr. James Cone of liberation theology, he points out in Spirituals and the Blues, in his book Spiritual and the Blues, he points out that even black seculars, particularly, it is not that they are secular by means of Western notion, right? But the process there is not just a getting rid of God in the words of what James Baldwin does. He actually pushes and says that it's the opportunity that some seculars actually just ignore God. Oftentimes, if I talk to my mother, who has a very close relationship, right, to her religion and her relationship with God, right, immediately I ask, well, does God have to be in the equation? Because it's not that I'm not interested in engaging her based off of her knowing, right? That's a formation of knowing for her. And I'm not going, and it's my humanist value to honor her epistemology, her understanding of how she has moved and survived in the world, okay? And maintain that integrity and then meet her and arrive with her in that journey and say, well, what part are you, right, in this equation, right? So if God is not there, I'm just want to ask further, who are you? And I think that that is a very important call to about being generative, that when we ask, who are you? We are not only asking this from a space of actual kind of emptiness. We're asking you to flourish, as you said. So, I think that's, as we think about kind of this spiritual generosity, how we name spirituality is also not constituted on God.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the central things that we humanists have I think, mistaken over time. Because as I've often said, African American humanism and Euro-American humanism are not the same. They grew up in the same soil, but it's a birch tree and an elm tree or whatever, right? They grew up in the same soil of the United States. They used the same ideas, but they were going in very different places, going to very different places. The liberation that white humanists have had to have would be like being able to serve on a jury, which we couldn't do until the 1960s, for example. But those were always civil liberties, right? Civil liberties. It wasn't about being oppressed openly in the street, right? And that's the difference. And so I always say that African American humanism is totally about liberation. And we have to, as white humanists, we have to reach toward that idea of liberation, I think. Because that's the answer for us, all of us in humanity, I think.
No, I mean, my thought is all the time. If my humanism is not, anyone I work in these circles with, if I'm not attached to liberation, that's not humanism for me, right? And I find it to be very important that when my advisor during my PhD wrote a book on the African burial grounds in New York City, and she talks about spirituality, and she's kind of a naturalistic humanist, so her framing was very interesting. She frames spirituality and names some very important things as she's doing this research. She says that spirituality is a reclamation of time, space, and memory. Time, space, and memory, a reclamation. And it's very important because this aids us as humanists to understand the importance of our own agency, our capacity, and how we arrive. And what would it look like for most of us in this space not to only sit with the way that we, show up in space, but really arrive. And arrive in a way that allows for us to know who we are And when we come into that space, we offer folk an opportunity to become, not belong, but become. Most of our congregational spaces are really still stuck, and a lot of our spaces that we want to hang in sit in a space of belonging. Right. But becoming is where the generative happens.
Right. Well, and one of the interesting things, we don't proselytize, we know that. But I was looking at why do some religious traditions proselytize? And the interesting thing is that the religions that proselytize are those that are the most difficult to believe in. So why do you get people out on the street proselytizing? Because when they get spit on, they believe in it more, right? And the more they get made fun of, they believe in it more. So here we sit. We're pretty convinced that we're right here. So we're going to go home and we're not worried about it. But folks, look around us, and America is often not agreeing with us. So to live as a liberal, both socially and religiously, whatever that means, that's not easy. But we are called to do it because our opponents are doing it very well. If we can go to a slide real fast here, I do want to share something. This is from the actual typescript of Carl Storm from the 1960s, and that's what we'll be looking at noon today. I want to share what he had to say about religion after he has quoted Dewey. I will read it so you don't have to read ahead. I know y'all, we can't hand you things because you're going to read it. I'll read it to you. Still, says Carl Storm, I would venture the remark that no one can give up religion itself. They can only give up certain religious beliefs. Mm-hmm. For religion is grounded today, as it always has been, in the unavoidable necessity of relating ourselves in some way to the universe and to the world, and of enlarging individual and social values. You see that? Connect to the world, increase individual and social values, the good things. To do so with intelligence and courage and dedicated commitment to the enrichment of life is of fundamental importance, and whether we are acknowledged to be religious is quite inconsequential. Mm-hmm. As I've said from up here a lot of times, I don't care if you think what you think religion is. It is a European invention. Europeans went around the world saying, "What's your religion?" "I ain't got one." "Well, then we've got a Catholicism just for you." Right?
Everybody gets Catholicism.
yeah. Y'all get over there, or we'll kill you. No. Religion is that which you live in as your highest belief system, right? Whatever you want to call it. And you can call it secular. I call mine secular most of the time because that's what it matches, secularity most of the time. But we have always been accused of being irreligious, unreligious, heretics. But no, we are holding to the highest spiritual generosity of giving. That's what humanism is about. Right.
You know, it's funny because, John Dewey points to that as well, this idea of, like, when we talk about our humanism and we talk about, being a religious humanist, it's, the words and what they mean. This is why it's very important for us to have not just definitions, but ethics, right? That our ethics help us clarify how we move and show and be in our practice, because we don't always use this. We might use similar language, but it doesn't always come out in the same way. And so the ethicist is always engaging in a progressive practice of constructing and deconstructing. So it's not just a situated definition. So when we think about, like, Dewey's early work, we see that pragmaticism kind of taking place even with language, and how he talks about really the religious is the ideal, right? The value, right? Values over belief. So if you don't use the word belief, you use values. If you're not using the term I have a religion, well, you have a congregation, you have a community, right? I'm a communal humanist. I am, right? Because some people are humanists and they're individualistic. Right. That can happen. And that's very real. And so how we offer people to practice with us is our ethic in being in right relationship and seeking right relationship, meaning an equitable one of understanding and compassion.
I want to end up by reading that poem to you again, and this time I have it on slides so you can follow along. And by the way, part of this belief here, Jay is here this year helping us develop a curriculum for our K through 100-year-old group. And part of that is we are being very conscious of the fact that African-American humanism and Euro-American humanism are not the same thing. But we can be in the same room, and we do have the same goals. And white liberals, you need to know black people. get to know some black people,
They were quite lovely.
Yeah, it's like, and that's what we're doing too, because we can't sit around saying, oh, that's what the city needs to do if we don't have everyone's voice in this room.
That part.
And so that's what we're doing is we're getting the secular humanist, religious humanist, congregational humanists in this building. Let me read that poem to you again. I've been thinking about the way when you walk down a crowded aisle, people pull in their legs to let you by. Or how strangers will say, bless you, when someone sneezes, a leftover from the bubonic plague. Don't die, we're saying. And sometimes when you spill lemons from your grocery bag, someone else will help you pick them up. Mostly, we don't want to harm each other. We want to be handed our cup of coffee hot and to say thank you to the person handing it, to smile at them and for them to smile back, for the waitress to call us honey when she sets down the bowl of clam chowder, and for the driver in the red pickup truck to let us pass. We have so little of each other now, so far from tribe and fire, only these brief moments of exchange. What if they are the true dwelling of the holy, these fleeting temples we make together when we say, here, have my seat. Go ahead, you first. I like your hat. Thank you. And we'll sing together now.